The cruelest prisons are the ones disguised as family. Ethan Carter learned that truth long before he understood what it meant to be an Omega. Every morning began before sunrise, when the old farmhouse was still wrapped in darkness and the cold kitchen floor greeted his bare feet before anyone else in the house had even opened their eyes. By the time the clock reached 6, breakfast was already cooking, the laundry was sorted, the porch had been swept, and every chore his mother could think of had quietly disappeared from her list because Ethan had already finished it. Yet no matter how hard he worked, nobody ever thanked him. His younger brother, Lucas, wandered downstairs with sleepy eyes and a carefree smile, grabbing a plate without so much as noticing who had prepared the meal. Their mother only smiled at Lucas, asking if he had slept well, while Ethan received nothing more than another order before he had even taken his first bite of food. It had been this way for as long as he could remember. If something broke, Ethan was blamed. If something went missing, Ethan was questioned. If the house looked perfect, everyone assumed that was simply how things were supposed to be. Sometimes Ethan wondered whether anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. The answer always seemed obvious. They would only notice because no one else would wash the dishes, scrub the floors, or keep the house running. At 19 years old, Ethan had never celebrated a birthday with a cake, never received a heartfelt gift, and never heard his mother say she was proud of him. Instead, she reminded him almost daily that he owed her everything because she had given him a roof over his head. Ethan accepted every word in silence because arguing had never changed anything. Hope, he had discovered years ago, was an expensive luxury. That afternoon, while carrying a heavy basket of freshly folded clothes upstairs, Ethan heard voices drifting through the half-open study door. He recognized his mother's voice immediately, calm and unusually pleasant, the tone she reserved for strangers or people she wanted something from. Another unfamiliar voice answered with quiet confidence. Ethan never intended to listen, but one sentence froze him in place. He's finally old enough, his mother said. Soon he'll be worth far more than he's ever been to this family. Ethan's fingers tightened around the laundry basket until his knuckles turned white. The word echoed inside his mind. Not loved. Not protected. Worth. The conversation continued too softly for him to catch every detail, but he heard enough to understand that plans were already being made without him. His future was being discussed like an item waiting to change hands. His heartbeat grew louder than the voices behind the door. For the first time in years, fear wasn't the only thing filling his chest. There was confusion, disbelief, and a painful realization that even after everything he had sacrificed, he had never truly belonged in this house. He quietly stepped away before anyone noticed him, carrying the basket upstairs with trembling hands, unaware that somewhere across the city, one of the most powerful alpha businessmen in the country had just received a file containing a single photograph, a single name, and a single instruction that would change both of their lives forever: Ethan Carter. Sleep never truly came that night. Ethan lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above his small bedroom, replaying every word he had overheard until sunrise painted pale lines across the walls. He wanted to believe he had misunderstood, yet his mother's behavior changed in subtle ways that only confirmed his growing fear. She suddenly insisted that he stop doing the outdoor chores that left his hands rough with dirt. She ordered him to stay inside, wear cleaner clothes, and avoid anything that might leave a scratch on his skin. It was the first time in years she had paid attention to his appearance, but there was no warmth behind her instructions. She was preserving something she intended to hand over. Ethan tried to convince himself there had to be another explanation, but every passing hour made that hope weaker. Later that afternoon, a black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway, its polished finish looking strangely out of place beside the aging farmhouse. A sharply dressed man stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio, and greeted Ethan's mother with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Ethan remained in the kitchen preparing tea until he was called into the living room. The visitor studied him with polite professionalism, asking simple questions about his age, health, education, and daily routine. Ethan answered quietly while feeling less like a person and more like someone being evaluated. When the questions ended, the man handed Ethan a sealed envelope. Inside was an appointment for a comprehensive medical examination at a private clinic in the city. His mother accepted it before Ethan could even finish reading. She answered every question on his behalf, thanked the visitor, and walked him outside without allowing Ethan to say another word. The appointment was scheduled for the very next morning. The clinic looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical center. Everything smelled clean and expensive, and every employee greeted his mother with unusual respect. Ethan completed a long series of examinations without anyone explaining why they were necessary. Blood samples, routine scans, genetic screening, and specialized evaluations stretched across several hours. Finally, a senior physician entered the consultation room carrying a digital tablet. His expression remained calm, but his eyes lingered on Ethan longer than expected before he looked toward Ethan's mother. "Congratulations," Dr. Reynolds said. "Your son possesses one of the rarest omega compatibility profiles we have documented in recent years." Ethan felt the room fall silent. The doctor continued speaking about unique biological markers, exceptional compatibility, and extraordinary long-term value among influential alpha families. Every sentence sounded less like a discussion about a young man's future and more like a financial report. His mother did not ask whether Ethan was frightened. She did not ask whether he understood any of it. Instead, she asked practical questions about demand, confidentiality, and recommendations. The physician answered carefully, mentioning that several private organizations specialized in arranging introductions for individuals with profiles like Ethan's. As they drove home, neither of them spoke for nearly an hour. Ethan stared through the passenger window watching the city disappear behind endless highways until his mother finally broke the silence. "You should be grateful," she said without looking at him. "Opportunities like this do not happen twice." Ethan wanted to ask what opportunities she meant, but something inside him already knew the answer. That evening he wandered onto the back porch after everyone had gone inside. The cool breeze carried the scent of pine trees from the woods beyond the property, offering a rare moment of peace. For the first time in years he allowed himself to imagine another life, one where he could wake up without fear, where kindness was not something earned through endless labor, and where someone might one day call him family because they truly meant it. Inside the house, his mother received another phone call. She spoke in a low voice, but one sentence drifted through the open kitchen window. "The auction will be held this weekend. Everything is ready." Ethan's heart stopped for a single terrifying moment. He had not misunderstood after all, and somewhere far beyond the quiet farmhouse, a sealed file bearing his name had already reached the desk of Adrian Blackwood, who read every page in complete silence before giving only one instruction to his trusted assistant. "Prepare the car. We are attending the event ourselves." The drive into the city felt longer than any journey Ethan had ever taken. His mother barely acknowledged him as they traveled through crowded streets until the familiar neighborhoods disappeared behind towering glass buildings and private estates hidden behind iron gates. When the car finally stopped, Ethan looked out the window and found himself staring at an elegant historic hotel that appeared to be hosting an exclusive charity gala. Men and women in formal evening wear entered beneath sparkling chandeliers while luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Nothing about the scene suggested danger, yet the uneasy feeling in Ethan's chest only grew stronger. His mother handed him a neatly pressed black suit and instructed him to change without asking questions. Ethan obeyed because he no longer believed he had a choice. Once inside, smiling attendants welcomed them with perfect manners and guided them through a series of quiet hallways away from the public ballroom. The music faded behind closed doors until they reached a private reception lounge where only a small group of carefully dressed guests waited. Some spoke in hushed voices while others quietly studied digital files displayed on tablets. Ethan noticed several young Omegas sitting silently with family members, all wearing expressions that mirrored his own uncertainty. Nobody explained why they were there. Nobody needed to. The atmosphere itself revealed that every person in the room had arrived with a purpose that remained politely unspoken. A woman wearing an elegant silver suit approached Ethan and offered him tea before asking him to complete a brief profile confirming his education, hobbies, favorite books, and future dreams. The questions felt strangely personal compared to the cold medical examinations from only days before. When Ethan hesitated, The woman smiled gently and encouraged him to answer honestly because the information would help interested parties understand his personality. Interested parties. The phrase lingered in his thoughts long after she walked away. Across the room, his mother spoke confidently with several distinguished guests, laughing more warmly than Ethan had heard in years. She never once looked in his direction. He realized she was not worried about leaving him alone because, in her mind, he already belonged to the event instead of to her. Minutes later, everyone was escorted into an elegant private hall furnished with polished wood, crystal lighting, and rows of comfortable seats facing a raised stage. It resembled an exclusive business conference more than anything else. An older gentleman welcomed the guests and spoke about compatibility, partnerships, discretion, and long-term commitments between influential families. Every sentence was carefully chosen, avoiding language that sounded inappropriate while making the purpose unmistakably clear. Ethan lowered his eyes, feeling as though the walls around him were slowly closing in. Names began appearing on a large screen, each followed by respectful introductions highlighting education, talents, achievements, and unique compatibility reports. The audience listened with professional interest, occasionally exchanging quiet remarks. Ethan's heartbeat became impossible to ignore when an attendant approached and whispered that he would be next. His hands trembled despite every attempt to remain calm. Somewhere near the back of the hall, another set of doors opened almost silently. Several guests instinctively turned toward the entrance before lowering their voices. Ethan followed their gaze and saw a tall man wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit enter with measured confidence. He did not seek attention, yet every conversation around him seemed to stop on its own. Even those who had been speaking moments earlier now watched him with unmistakable respect. Ethan had never seen him before, but he immediately understood that this newcomer occupied a different level of influence than anyone else present. The event coordinator hurried forward to greet him personally while several distinguished guests stood to shake his hand. The man acknowledged them with calm courtesy before taking a seat near the front, his expression unreadable as a sealed folder was quietly placed before him. Ethan could not hear the whispered introduction, but one name spread through the room almost like a ripple across still water. Adrian Blackwood had arrived. Ethan's name appeared on the screen only seconds later, accompanied by the same photograph that had been taken during his medical evaluation. Every eye in the room shifted toward him as the coordinator invited him to step forward, completely unaware that the moment destined to transform his entire future had already begun the instant Adrian Blackwood opened the folder resting in front of him. Every step toward the stage felt heavier than the last. Ethan could sense dozens of eyes following him as he stood beneath the bright lights while the large screen displayed his photograph, education records, medical compatibility profile, and a carefully written summary describing him as respectful, hardworking, and exceptionally rare. The coordinator spoke with polished confidence, emphasizing Ethan's remarkable compatibility assessment and promising complete privacy and professionalism throughout the selection process. Ethan barely heard a word. His attention drifted toward the audience where his mother sat with a hopeful smile that she had never once shown him at home. It was a smile meant for the future she imagined, not for the son standing alone under the lights. Quiet conversation spread across the room as several influential guests reviewed the information displayed on their tablets. Some exchanged thoughtful glances while others asked discreet questions through assistants seated beside them. Ethan felt less like a young man and more like an opportunity everyone had come prepared to evaluate. He kept reminding himself to breathe slowly, refusing to let anyone see the fear building inside him. The coordinator invited interested guests to express their intentions privately through the event's formal process, explaining that every introduction would respect mutual consent before any long-term decisions could be discussed. The words sounded reassuring, yet Ethan could not shake the feeling that his future was slipping beyond his control. Across the room, Adrian Blackwood remained perfectly still. He had not spoken since entering the hall. He simply studied the information inside the folder resting before him, occasionally lifting his eyes toward Ethan with an unreadable expression that revealed neither approval nor rejection. Unlike the others, he did not whisper to advisors or request additional details. He observed quietly, as though searching for something no report could ever explain. Minutes passed before the coordinator respectfully approached Adrian's seat and asked whether he wished to participate. The the room gradually fell silent. Even the guests who had been engaged in quiet conversations now waited for his response. Adrian closed the folder with deliberate calm before standing. His measured steps echoed softly across the polished floor as he walked toward the front of the hall. Ethan instinctively straightened his posture without understanding why. There was nothing threatening about Adrian's presence. Instead, there was an unmistakable sense of certainty surrounding him, the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to command attention. When Adrian stopped a few feet away, he looked directly at Ethan for the first time. Neither of them spoke immediately. Ethan noticed kind but observant grey eyes studying him with unexpected patience rather than cold calculation. For reasons he could not explain, the overwhelming panic inside him eased ever so slightly. The coordinator smiled politely and prepared to continue the formal introductions, but Adrian gently lifted one hand, signaling that no further explanation was necessary. The simple gesture immediately silenced the room once again. Without looking away from Ethan, Adrian spoke in a calm, steady voice that carried effortlessly through the elegant hall. "He is mine." The words were neither loud nor dramatic, yet they settled over the audience with extraordinary weight. No one interrupted. No one questioned him. Several guests quietly lowered their tablets while others exchanged knowing glances before returning them to their assistants. The atmosphere shifted so completely that Ethan could almost feel it. Moments earlier he had stood alone beneath dozens of evaluating eyes. Now every gaze had moved toward Adrian instead. The coordinator nodded respectfully, acknowledging the declaration without hesitation. Ethan looked toward his mother, expecting surprise, but what he saw instead was stunned disbelief quickly replaced by unmistakable satisfaction. Whatever future she had imagined seemed even greater than she had expected. Ethan, however, felt only confusion. Adrian had claimed responsibility for him with a single sentence, yet there had been no arrogance in his voice, no sense of ownership meant to diminish him. Instead, it sounded strangely like a promise. Adrian then turned toward Ethan once more and offered a small, reassuring smile before saying something that no one else in the room had expected to hear. "You have had enough people making decisions without asking what you want. Before anything happens, I would like to hear your answer first." In that single moment, Ethan realized Adrian Blackwood was the first person in his entire life who had ever cared whether his voice was heard. Silence lingered in the elegant hall long after Adrian's words settled over the audience. Ethan stood frozen, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. No one had ever asked what he wanted before. Every important decision in his life had always been made by someone else, and now the most influential man in the room was patiently waiting for his answer instead of demanding one. Ethan looked down for a moment, gathering the courage to speak. I only want a chance to live my own life," he said quietly. His voice was almost lost in the vast room, yet Adrian heard every word. A gentle expression crossed Adrian's face before he gave a small nod. "That is a reasonable wish," he replied. "And it is one that should have belonged to you from the beginning." Those simple words carried more kindness than Ethan had experienced in years. The coordinator formally concluded the presentation, explaining that the remaining legal arrangements would be handled privately according to the event's policies. Guests gradually returned to quiet conversations, but many continued glancing toward Adrian with obvious curiosity. Ethan noticed that nobody challenged his decision. Whatever authority Adrian possessed extended far beyond wealth. His reputation alone seemed enough to end every discussion before it began. As the audience slowly dispersed, Ethan's mother hurried toward Adrian with a smile that appeared carefully rehearsed. She thanked him repeatedly and spoke about Ethan's hard-working nature, his obedience, and the sacrifices their family had supposedly made for him. Ethan listened in disbelief. She described a loving home that had never existed. Adrian remained perfectly courteous throughout her speech, but he never once took his eyes off Ethan. When she finally paused, Adrian answered with calm professionalism. "I appreciate the information. From this point forward, I will learn about Ethan directly from Ethan." The polite response immediately ended the conversation. His mother forced another smile, though the disappointment behind it was impossible to hide. A few minutes later, Ethan followed Adrian through a private exit where a sleek black vehicle waited beneath the evening lights. A driver respectfully opened the rear door while another assistant carefully placed Ethan's small overnight bag inside. Ethan hesitated before getting into the car. He realized he had brought almost nothing with him because nobody had expected him to return home that night. Adrian noticed the hesitation without saying anything. Once they were both seated, the vehicle quietly pulled away from the hotel. The city lights passed outside the windows as neither of them spoke for several minutes. Surprisingly, the silence felt comfortable instead of frightening. Finally, Adrian broke it. "You must have many questions." Ethan let out a nervous breath. "I do not even know where to begin." Adrian smiled faintly. "Then begin with the one that matters most." Ethan looked toward him carefully. "Why me?" Adrian considered the question before answering. "Because every report I received described your compatibility, your health, your value, and your potential. Not one of them described who you actually are. I wanted to meet the person behind the paperwork before making any decision." Ethan struggled to process the answer. It sounded honest, yet difficult to believe. Adrian continued speaking with the same calm tone. "You are not expected to trust me today. Trust is earned over time. Until then, you will have your own room, complete privacy, and the freedom to decide your future without pressure from anyone." Ethan stared out the window again, watching the familiar skyline gradually disappear as they crossed a bridge toward the quieter northern side of the city. For the first time in years, he realized nobody was giving him another list of chores. Nobody was criticizing him for sitting still. Nobody was reminding him that he was a burden. Nearly 40 minutes later, the car turned through tall iron gates and entered a peaceful estate surrounded by towering oak trees and carefully maintained gardens. The mansion itself was impressive without feeling cold, its warm lights glowing against the evening sky like a place where people actually lived instead of simply displayed their success. As the vehicle came to a gentle stop, several staff members greeted Adrian with respectful smiles before welcoming Ethan with equal courtesy. No one looked at him with pity. No one treated him like property. Standing at the front entrance, Ethan suddenly realized he had crossed more than a physical distance that evening. For the first time since childhood, he had stepped into a place where his future no longer seemed predetermined, even though he still had no idea why Adrian Blackwood looked at him with a quiet familiarity that felt almost as though they had met long before fate brought them together again. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise out of pure habit. For a few confused seconds he expected to hear his mother calling his name from downstairs or another endless list of chores waiting outside his bedroom door. Instead, there was only silence, followed by the distant sound of birds beyond the tall windows. He quickly made his bed, folded the blanket with careful precision, and quietly stepped into the hallway. The estate was already awake, but nothing resembled the life he had known. Staff members greeted one another with warm smiles instead of anxious urgency, and no one barked orders across the house. Unsure of what he should do, Ethan found the kitchen and instinctively reached for an apron hanging neatly beside the pantry. Before he could begin preparing breakfast, the head housekeeper approached him with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said politely. "Breakfast is already being prepared. You are our guest. Please allow us to handle everything." Ethan immediately apologized and stepped back, embarrassed that he had assumed work was expected. The housekeeper seemed puzzled by his apology. "There is nothing to apologize for," she replied kindly. "Mr. Blackwood instructed everyone to make sure you feel comfortable here." Ethan thanked her quietly before taking a seat by one of the large windows overlooking the gardens. He watched the morning sunlight spread across perfectly trimmed hedges and fountains that sparkled beneath the clear sky. It felt strangely unreal. Only 2 days earlier he had believed kindness belonged to other people's lives. Now he was surrounded by it without knowing how to accept it. A few minutes later, Adrian entered the dining room wearing a simple navy sweater instead of the perfectly tailored suits Ethan had seen him wear before. Without the formal setting of the previous evening, he looked less like an untouchable business leader and more like an ordinary man beginning another day. He greeted every employee by name before taking his seat across from Ethan. "Did you sleep well?" Adrian asked. Ethan hesitated before answering honestly. "Better than I have in years." Adrian nodded with quiet satisfaction. "I am glad to hear that." Breakfast was served, but Adrian spent more time asking Ethan about his interests than discussing business. He wanted to know what books Ethan enjoyed reading, whether he preferred the mountains or the ocean, and what kind of music he listened to while working. Ethan answered cautiously at first, surprised that someone genuinely wanted to know such ordinary things about him. As the conversation continued, the nervousness slowly faded. After breakfast, Adrian invited Ethan to walk through the gardens. They followed a winding stone path lined with blooming roses until they reached a quiet pond surrounded by oak trees. Adrian stopped beside the water and remained silent for several moments before speaking again. "There is something I have wanted to tell you since yesterday," he said. Ethan looked at him with curiosity. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and carefully unfolded an old, slightly faded photograph. The edges showed years of wear, but the image remained clear enough to recognize. It showed a frightened teenage boy sitting alone at a city bus station during a heavy rainstorm. Standing beside him was a younger Adrian, several years before he had become one of the country's most respected business leaders. Ethan stared at the photograph, searching his memory. Adrian smiled softly. 12 years ago, I ran away after losing someone very important to me. I sat at that station believing I had nothing left. You were just a child delivering newspapers nearby. You walked over, handed me the only umbrella you had, and told me that storms always ended if someone kept walking." Ethan blinked in surprise. A faint memory surfaced through the years, no more than a brief moment he had completely forgotten. He remembered seeing a lonely stranger sitting in the rain and acting on simple kindness before hurrying home. He had never expected to see that person again. Adrian folded the photograph with great care. "You probably forgot about it before the week was over," he said with a quiet laugh. "I never did. I searched for you for years, but I only knew your first name. Yesterday, when I opened your file, I recognized your face immediately." Ethan stood speechless as countless unanswered questions suddenly fell into place. Adrian had not attended the event because Ethan possessed a rare compatibility profile. He had come because he had finally found the boy whose simple act of compassion had carried him through one of the darkest days of his own life, and from that moment Ethan understood that destiny had begun weaving their paths together long before either of them realized it. Over the following week, Ethan slowly began to understand that peace was something a person could actually learn. Each morning he joined Adrian for breakfast, each afternoon he explored another quiet corner of the estate, and each evening he discovered another small habit that made the unfamiliar mansion feel less intimidating. The staff treated him with genuine respect, never because Adrian demanded it, but because kindness seemed woven into the culture of the household itself. Even so, Ethan often caught himself apologizing for things that required no apology. He apologized for sitting too long in the library, for accepting a second cup of coffee, and even for asking where he should place an empty glass after lunch. Every apology revealed another invisible scar left by the life he had endured. Adrian never criticized him for it. Instead, he patiently answered every apology the same way. "You do not need permission to exist here." Those words stayed with Ethan long after each conversation ended. For the first time, he began imagining a future that belonged to him instead of one assigned by someone else. That fragile sense of hope was interrupted on a quiet Friday afternoon when one of Adrian's assistants entered the study carrying a tablet with an uneasy expression. "Mr. Blackwood," the assistant said, "the Carter family is requesting an immediate meeting at the front gate. They insist it concerns Ethan." Adrian looked toward Ethan before calmly asking, "Would you like to see them?" Ethan hesitated. A part of him still longed for the impossible dream that his mother had come simply because she missed her son. Another part already knew better. After a long silence, he nodded. "I would rather hear what they have to say than spend the rest of my life wondering." Adrian respected the decision without argument. A few minutes later they walked together to a private reception room near the entrance of the estate. Ethan's mother and Lucas were already waiting. The moment they saw the elegant surroundings, their expressions revealed unmistakable amazement. His mother hurried toward Ethan with open arms, speaking in a warm voice that felt strangely unfamiliar. "There you are. We have been so worried about you." Ethan stood perfectly still. During all the years they had lived together, she had never embraced him. The gesture felt more like a performance than affection. Lucas smiled awkwardly before glancing around the room, clearly impressed by the estate's luxury. After several moments of forced concern, Ethan's mother finally revealed the real reason for the visit. She explained that the family was struggling financially and suggested that, since Ethan was now living such a comfortable life, it would only be fair for him to help the people who had raised him. She spoke of family responsibility, gratitude, and sacrifice as though the past could simply be rewritten through carefully chosen words. Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. Adrian remained beside him, saying nothing, allowing Ethan the space to answer for himself. The silence stretched until Ethan finally looked directly into his mother's eyes. His voice remained calm, but it carried a quiet confidence that surprised even him. "For years I believed that love had to be earned by working harder, speaking less, and expecting nothing in return. I know now that love does not work that way." His mother attempted another smile, insisting that families sometimes made mistakes. Ethan nodded gently. "Yes, they do. But they also apologize when they realize they have hurt someone." The room became completely still. She had no response because no apology had ever been prepared. Adrian finally spoke, his tone respectful but unmistakably firm. "Ethan will make his own decisions regarding his future and his relationships. No one else will make them for him again." His mother lowered her eyes, realizing the conversation had slipped beyond her control. As she and Lucas quietly left the estate, Ethan watched them disappear through the front gates without chasing after them. There were tears in his eyes, not because he regretted letting them go, but because he had finally accepted a painful truth. Sometimes the family that gives you life cannot give you the love you deserve. As Adrian placed a reassuring hand over Ethan's shoulder, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, where an unknown observer lowered a camera after capturing every moment of the meeting before quietly making a phone call that would soon place both of their peaceful lives in unexpected danger. The days following the visit settled into a peaceful routine once again, but Adrian noticed something Ethan did not. The security team quietly increased patrols around the estate, unfamiliar vehicles occasionally appeared beyond the front gate, and confidential meetings became more frequent inside Adrian's private office. Whenever Ethan asked if something was wrong, Adrian simply smiled and assured him that everything was under control. Ethan wanted to believe him, yet he could sense a quiet tension hidden beneath the calm atmosphere. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan decided to visit a nearby botanical garden with two members of the estate staff while Adrian attended an important business conference across town. The outing was simple and relaxing, filled with blooming flowers, shaded walking paths, and families enjoying the pleasant weather. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself laughing without hesitation as he paused to admire a quiet pond surrounded by white lilies. As they prepared to leave, one of the staff members received an urgent phone call requesting immediate assistance with an unexpected situation involving the estate. Ethan encouraged them to respond, insisting he would wait inside the garden's visitor center for only a few minutes. Before leaving, the staff member reminded Ethan to remain indoors until another vehicle arrived. Ethan agreed without concern. While waiting, he noticed a well-dressed older woman struggling to carry several heavy boxes toward her car. Without thinking, he walked over to help, just as he had once offered an umbrella to a lonely stranger years before. The woman thanked him warmly, but as Ethan placed the final box into the trunk, another elegant sedan quietly pulled alongside the parking area. A professionally dressed man stepped out and politely introduced himself as one of Adrian's newly assigned drivers. He explained that a last-minute change had been made because the original vehicle had experienced mechanical trouble. Everything about his appearance seemed convincing, yet something felt slightly unusual. Instead of climbing into the car immediately, Ethan smiled apologetically and said, "I will call Mr. Blackwood first. He always tells me to confirm unexpected changes." The man's expression remained calm, but his eyes briefly revealed disappointment before he answered that Adrian was currently unavailable. Ethan quietly reached into his pocket anyway. Before leaving the estate that morning, Adrian had given him a small card containing several emergency contact numbers along with a simple piece of advice. If anything ever feels unusual, trust your instincts before your fears. Ethan dialed the first number without hesitation. Within seconds, Adrian's chief of security answered. Ethan calmly explained the situation while discreetly describing the unfamiliar vehicle and its license plate. The response came immediately. Stay exactly where you are. Our team is already on the way. Do not enter that car. Ethan thanked him and calmly ended the call. Rather than confronting the driver, he politely excused himself and returned inside the busy visitor center, choosing a seat near several families and park employees. Moments later, the unfamiliar sedan quietly pulled away without incident. Less than 5 minutes later, Adrian's security team arrived, followed shortly by Adrian himself, who had left the conference the instant he received the report. The moment he entered the visitor center, his eyes immediately found Ethan sitting safely by the window. Relief softened the composed expression he usually carried. Ethan stood and walked toward him with a reassuring smile. I remembered what you told me, he said. Adrian nodded, grateful beyond words. And because you trusted yourself, you protected more than your own safety today. Later that evening, investigators confirmed that the suspicious vehicle had been using false identification connected to individuals attempting to gather information about Adrian's personal life and business relationships. No confrontation had occurred, no one had been harmed, and the situation ended peacefully because Ethan had chosen caution over panic. Standing together on the mansion balcony beneath a sky filled with stars, Adrian looked at Ethan with quiet pride before speaking the words that settled every remaining doubt inside the young Omega's heart. You were never someone who needed saving, Ethan. You only needed someone who believed you were strong enough to save yourself, and I will always stand beside you while you do. Several months passed, and the quiet estate that had once felt unfamiliar slowly became the first place Ethan had ever been able to call home without hesitation. The nervous young man who had apologized for every small inconvenience was gradually replaced by someone who smiled more often, walked with quiet confidence, and finally believed his opinions mattered. He enrolled in college courses that Adrian encouraged him to choose for himself instead of following anyone else's expectations. He volunteered at a local community center on weekends, helping teenagers who had grown up believing their circumstances would define the rest of their lives. Every time one of them doubted their own worth, Ethan recognized a younger version of himself and gently reminded them that kindness toward themselves was just as important as kindness toward others. Adrian watched those changes with quiet pride, never taking credit for Ethan's growth because he understood that the strength had always belonged to Ethan. He had merely provided a place where that strength could finally breathe. News of Ethan's work gradually spread throughout the city, and people who had once known only Adrian's reputation as a powerful business leader began recognizing Ethan as someone whose compassion inspired others. One autumn afternoon, Adrian invited Ethan to return with him to the old bus station where their lives had unknowingly crossed more than a decade earlier. The station had been renovated since then, but one wooden bench remained exactly where it had always been. Adrian smiled as they stood beside it. This is where everything began for me, he said quietly. Ethan looked around, trying to picture the rainy afternoon he had nearly forgotten. I never imagined one small act could change someone's life, he admitted. Adrian shook his head gently. It changed 2 lives. From his coat pocket, Adrian removed the same faded photograph he had carried for years, placing it beside a brand new picture taken only a few weeks earlier of the two of them laughing together in the estate garden. For a long time, Adrian said, I believed success meant building the strongest company and protecting everyone around me. Then I realized there was one promise I had never fulfilled. I wanted to thank the person who reminded me that hope still existed. Ethan felt his eyes fill with emotion as Adrian reached into another pocket and revealed a simple platinum ring. There was nothing extravagant about it. It reflected the afternoon sunlight with quiet elegance, just like the man holding it. Adrian smiled with the same calm sincerity Ethan had trusted from the beginning. Ethan Carter, I am not asking because of destiny, obligation, or the past. I am asking because every future I imagine is brighter when you are standing beside me. Will you build that future with me?" Ethan laughed softly through happy tears before answering the easiest question he had ever been asked. "Yes. I would like that very much." Their engagement was celebrated several months later in the gardens of the estate, surrounded by close friends, loyal employees, and the people who had become their true family. There were no grand speeches about wealth or influence. Instead, every toast celebrated kindness, resilience, and second chances. Even the staff who had welcomed Ethan on his very first day admitted they had never seen Adrian smile as often as he did now. During the reception, Ethan noticed a familiar figure standing quietly near the entrance. It was his mother. She remained only for a moment before turning to leave. Ethan walked over and gently stopped her. She struggled to find the right words before finally whispering the apology she should have offered years earlier. Ethan listened peacefully before giving a small nod. "I cannot change the past," he said. "But I do not have to carry it forever." There was no anger left in his voice, only acceptance. As she quietly walked away, Ethan returned to Adrian with a lighter heart than he had ever known. That evening, beneath strings of glowing lights and a sky filled with stars, Ethan realized that the greatest miracle of his life had never been meeting the most powerful alpha in the room. It had been discovering that his value had never depended on how others treated him. The right people had simply helped him see what had been true all along, and from that day forward, the boy who had once believed he was invisible stepped confidently into a future where he was finally loved, respected, and truly home.